Sunlight glances off whitewashed houses and bathed olive groves, but then a single shot rings out, and Cyprus flips from a Mediterranean postcard to a battlefield. 3 forces, 1 island, and an empire bleeding in the dust. Welcome to Season 1 of TimeGhost Cold War coverage in our series War to War, where we cover the events of the decade after World War II that brought man from the brink of destruction to the threshold of the stars. I am Sebastian Brandstetter. In the midst of the conflict, the burst of gunfire fells 2 British army wives right where they stand. In response, soldiers flood the streets, round up men in a blind fury. Boots crash on cobblestones, curses ring out, and a young private, trembling with rage, drives his rifle butt into a bound prisoner as a chaplain watches in horror. With one pull of the trigger, this small island, once a quiet outpost of the British Empire, now seethes with rebellion. To those serving Her Majesty the Queen, it is a last stand for order and imperial prestige. To Greek Cypriot guerrillas in the hills, it is a holy struggle, and to Turkish Cypriot militias in the villages, it will eventually become a desperate fight to defend culture and identity. Between them, terror breeds on all sides, bombs in cafes, bodies in ditches, whispers in the night. And the empire that once spanned the world finds itself bleeding in the dust of a place that many Londoners might hear about only a few times a year. But how do we get here? The British have ruled Cyprus since 1878 under a secret agreement with the Ottoman Empire. This arrangement was pragmatic. The island remained nominally under Ottoman rule, but also under British administration, a safeguard for the Suez Canal, and with it, the route to the empire's crown jewel, India. When the First World War erupted in 1914 and the Ottomans joined the Central Powers, Britain responded by formally annexing Cyprus, and in 1925, the island became a crown colony. By the mid-20th century, it was a more or less tranquil outpost of empire, a garrison island of olive groves, a place British officials sometimes call the Gibraltar of the East. But beneath the colonial calm, 2 peoples live side by side: Greek Cypriots, the vast majority, and Turkish Cypriots, a smaller but deeply rooted minority. Their villages mingle in the lowlands and hills, and for years life moved in a rhythm of shared markets, festivals, and wary coexistence. Yet, by the 1950s, nationalism, Greek, Turkish, and British, reignites long-simmering grievances. Greek Cypriots look across the sea to Greece, now a fragile democracy recovering from civil war, and see their destiny there. They call their dream enosis, union with Greece, a cause rooted in the 19th century idea of a single Greek nation. In 1950, the Orthodox Church organizes an unofficial plebiscite. 96% of Greek Cypriots who participate demand enosis, but the British dismissed the result as meaningless. To the Greek majority, however, it feels like a sacred charge. Their leader is Archbishop Makarios III, tall, eloquent, and in black robes, crowned both bishop and politician. He is young, only 37, but commands immense moral and spiritual authority. In sermons, he weaves the language of faith with nationalism. Enosis is not merely a political goal, but a divine mandate. At first, Makarios hopes diplomacy will suffice. He petitions London, then the United Nations for self-determination, the same principle already granted to other colonies of Britain. But British officials, unwilling to lose a strategic base in the Eastern Mediterranean, reject the plea. So, by 1953, he establishes a liberation committee and swears before God Almighty to drive Britain off the island. In London and Athens alike, while diplomats debate Cyprus' future, the bishop's determination only hardens. And so does that of the militants. They gather in secret beneath the shadow of the Troodos Mountains. Among them is Grigorios Grivas, a Cypriot-born Greek army officer in his mid-50s. During World War II, he founded Organization X in Athens, initially conducting intelligence operations for the Allies. However, after 1943, Organization X shifted focus to fighting communist partisans, EAM and ELAS, rather than the occupiers, the Nazis. By 1944, he then fought alongside British forces against communists in the Battle of Athens and the ensuing civil war. He is disciplined, intensely nationalistic, and convinced that freedom can only come through violence. In late 1954 or early 1955, the sources aren't quite clear, Grivas slips onto Cyprus under the codename Diogenes, named for a Byzantine warrior of legend. He begins organizing a guerrilla force, the EOKA, the Ethniki Organosis Kyprion Agoniston, or National Organization of Cypriot Fighters. And he is not alone. Disillusioned by diplomacy and the nascent United Nations, the Archbishop Makarios has been involved since the beginning and quickly rises as the political leader of this underground movement. That does not mean he stops advocating internationally for enosis through diplomatic means though. It just means he is now pursuing a double strategy. To the public, Makarios serves as a mask, softening the image of EOKA's terror and giving the anti-British struggle a more acceptable, respectable face, while in private, he is closely connected to the EOKA and Grivas. So, with the Archbishop's blessing, EOKA's members take oaths before icons and priests. Their weapons are smuggled from Greece aboard fishing boats. Their meetings are held by candlelight in mountain chapels. Grivas' plan is audacious, a three-phase insurgency. First, urban sabotage to shock the British, then rural guerrilla warfare to exhaust them, and finally, a popular uprising to drive them off the island. Although enosis is far from the only thing binding EOKA together. Its members are bound by a mixture of far-right, in parts even fascist ideology, religious zealotry, and a seemingly infinite hatred of communism. EOKA proclaims its mission boldly, with the help of God, with faith in our honorable struggle, with the backing of all Hellenism, we have taken up the struggle to throw off the English yoke, our banners high, bearing the slogan handed down as a holy trust, death or victory. This propaganda leaflet delivers on emotion and faith, sure, but the thing is, what matters are bombs, guns, and armed men. And while EOKA might possess, at least allegedly, support from the very highest authority, they lack pretty much everywhere else. In truth, they are a small outfit, perhaps a few hundred armed men, yet their forces are disciplined, fanatical, and exceptionally well organized. On the night of April 1st, 1955, EOKA brings the insurgency to life. Across Cyprus, carefully timed explosions shatter quiet towns. In Nicosia, the British barracks are bombed. Police stations in Limassol, Larnaca, and Famagusta are wrecked. Even a broadcasting station is blown up. In a single night, 16 bombs explode in urban centers across the island. One bomb also claims the first life of the revolt, although not in the way you might imagine. A young EOKA bomber is electrocuted when he tries to cut a power cable. By dawn, it is clear to all, a nationalist underground organization has struck. Outside, though, bewildered Cypriots see a new name carved onto walls, EOKA. The governor's office even swears to Parliament that no one has ever heard of the organization before, something that now changes rather quickly. The British response is immediate. Reinforcements arrive from Egypt and Malta. Soldiers patrol the streets, curfews fall across towns. Yet, the violence spreads faster than control can be restored. By May, bombs target not only police stations but also army clubs. British servicemen are shot in ambushes. Their families live under armed guard. Fear seeps into daily life. The EOKA aims not to defeat the British militarily, but to make the island ungovernable, forcing London to negotiate and ideally abandon ship. Grivas' diary explains the plan in more detail. The attacks will compel the British to deploy the army in strength, which Grivas calculates will drive his fighters deeper into the hills, where they will await the right moment for a general uprising. To move ahead, on April 2nd, he orders killer squads to strike more military and police patrols. Though a few days later, the British police discover an EOKA arms cache in Limassol. As a result, EOKA has to lie low and wait for a while. After all, you cannot pull off an armed rebellion without, well, arms. After a spring lull, and having gotten their hands on new weapons, EOKA prepares to relaunch their campaign on June 20th, 1955. Again, patrols outside barracks are ambushed, and explosions tear through army and police housing. EOKA even targets the homes of top commanders. At least 2 houses are bombed, including that of the Commander-in-Chief of British Middle East, General Sir Charles Keightley, and of Brigadier A.H. Ricketts, the commander of Cyprus District. More ominously, police, also including Greek Cypriot policemen, become prime targets. And it is here where the Archbishop and Grivas have a fundamental disagreement. Grivas has no qualms killing Greek Cypriots deemed to be in cahoots with the British. The Archbishop, on the other hand, starkly opposes this step. To him, Greek Cypriots should never be targets. And besides this moral dispute, they are also not on the same page concerning tactics. Grivas wants continuous military action, while Makarios would favor less frequent attacks on colonial infrastructure, which then could be leveraged in negotiations with the British. However, whatever reservations the Archbishop might hold, between the 20th and the 28th of June, 9 more stations come under attack island-wide. In Nicosia, a booby-trapped letterbox at the central police station kills a bystander. At Amiandos, a guard posted at the remote station is ambushed before dawn and murdered. By the end of summer, several plainclothes officers have been gunned down in broad daylight as well. These losses especially stun the colonial administration. EOKA's ability to identify and kill undercover policemen shows clearly how deeply EOKA has infiltrated Cyprus' security apparatus. And faced with this mounting spiral of assassination and reprisals, the British government shifts to open warfare. In October 1955, the cabinet approves Sir John Harding, who arrives as governor, to take overriding priority in crushing the insurgency. On November 26, 1955, Harding declares a formal state of emergency across the whole island. In public, he projects an air of calm and collectedness. Yet in private, he acknowledges EOKA as a fascist terrorist movement and tells London that only harsh measures can succeed. With the state of emergency, law enforcement agencies gain sweeping powers as civil rights are suspended. Police can detain suspects without charge, transportation controls are tightened, and military cordons seal off entire villages. 2 days later, the governor issues another proclamation. All military personnel are put on active service status, effectively subjecting troops to wartime law. Tanks rumble into towns, machine gun posts sprout at road junctions, soldiers dig trenches in the hills, and British regulars back every police officer. One colonial office document notes that by winter 1955, the army can flood the streets when needed, and roadblocks and patrols have become routine. Then, in early 1956, British troops number over 30,000 as helicopters buzz over the Troodos forests searching for guerrilla hideouts. And Governor Harding welcomes these forces, insisting publicly that the army acts with patience, with restraint, and with good humor, and in the best British traditions. But one British sergeant will later admit that restraint was more rhetoric than reality. There are confirmed cases of beatings and torture in British detention camps, despite official denials. However, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to gauge how extensive these practices actually were. Today, historians are confronted with a Gordian knot of EOKA propaganda and very limited British documentation. In any case, by early 1956, Cyprus feels less than the Gibraltar of the East and more like a war zone. Some British military historians will later claim that in Cyprus only the minimum necessary force is used. But since torture can never be characterized as the minimum necessary force, that goes a bit too far, at least in my mind. But I feel confident stating that at least efforts are made to do everything strictly by the book. London explicitly orders its forces to avoid outrageous acts, having recently learned the hard way what effect it can have on colonized peoples. And while the troops are thoroughly drilled for battle, they're also equipped with pre-drafted statements for the press. Because of the frequent EOKA attacks, by now, even village markets have become subject of random patrol sweeps. Father Kevin Mooney gives us a chilling eyewitness account that relays the atmosphere of violence and hatred. I saw a line, about 10 Cypriots kneeling. A small number of soldiers were with them. I saw one of them take a running kick at the back of one of the kneeling men, whilst another soldier was hitting them on the head with the butt of a rifle. The British are determined to restore authority at all costs, with a strong belief in the use of force, especially within the lower ranks who suffer the brunt of the EOKA attacks. This, in turn, fuels Cypriot resentment, turning many neutral islanders into EOKA supporters, exactly as Grivas intended. And another mistake further complicates the governor's work: his treatment of the Archbishop. The man still openly denies any involvement in EOKA violence, and still, his fiery speeches and refusal to condemn the guerrillas make him a symbol of rebellion. So in March 1956, British police seize him without warning and deport him to the Seychelles. This move backfires badly. Across Cyprus, churches toll their bells in protests, and to many Greek Cypriots, Makarios becomes a martyr. For the EOKA, his exile just further proves that negotiation is futile, intensifying the insurgency with more ambushes, mined roads, and shadow attacks. All the while, Greek Cypriot moderates live in constant fear. Victims, often unarmed civilians or local militiamen, are ambushed in their homes and their bodies paraded through villages as a grim warning in the name of martyrdom for Greece. The war also turns inward by now. Leftist, trade unionists, and AKEL, that's the Communist Party of Cyprus, members, are denounced as traitors and executed in the crossfire of ideological conflict. Grivas himself writes in his diary, "Terror must be met with terror." Governor Harding realizes that crushing the insurgents is not enough to end the war. Winning Greek Cypriot hearts and minds is also crucial. His emergency proclamations tasked the civil administration with improving living conditions. New schools, medical clinics, land reform, and jobs offering a better future than violence. British publicists highlight food aid, roadwork, and irrigation projects, while Harding hopes to convince Greek Cypriots that the British can provide security and a better future. However, loyalty is very hard to win at gunpoint. The EOKA ensures civilians remain under constant pressure. Even as the British sweep across whole parts of the island, villagers hide rebels. When British forces retreat, bombs and assassination threats follow to ensure it stays that way. British intelligence reports note that curfews, fines, and searches push Greek Cypriots further and further away from the colonial government. Again, right according to Grivas' plan. Meanwhile, Radio Athens, an EOKA mouthpiece, broadcast stories of villages being destroyed, schools closed, and refugees detained, blaming it all on the British fascists. At the same time, British officials call EOKA members fascist murderers. Both sides claim the moral high ground. Britain talks legality and restraint, while EOKA speaks of liberation and martyrdom. As the spiral of violence reaches further and further heights, EOKA leaflets proudly announce the execution of traitors, a label now applied to anyone who fails to support EOKA or Enosis actively. Yet, the British are not idle, and by the end of 1956, early 1957, their military presence has reached 40,000 troops. It is already a miracle how a force of 200 or 300 fighters managed to stand up to such a disproportionately sized foe? How are the EOKA even still standing at this point? They survive by tapping dense local intelligence, penetrating colonial services, running a resilient courier system, maintaining a strict cell structure, and, as we've seen, using ruthless counterintelligence, assassinations, intimidation, and deception that let a few hundred fighters repeatedly outwit and frustrate tens of thousands of British troops. Eventually, though, even Grivas has to accept that he is a hair's breadth from losing it all: Enosis, the EOKA, and potentially even his own life. So on March 14th, 1957, he pronounces a truce. But no peace returns to the island, and the EOKA is still to blame, truce or not. That's because in January 1957, in order to lessen the British pressure on his mountain holdouts, Grivas decided to deliberately target and kill Turkish Cypriot policemen in a bid to spark intercommunal riots in Nicosia, the capital of Cyprus. A plan which succeeds, well, in part. There are riots, all right, but as we know, Grivas still sees himself forced to announce the truce some 2 months later. And the unwanted consequence of his action is that in November 1957, the Turkish Cypriots, who have been caught between the front lines until now, and the Turkish government in Ankara, decide something has to change. As you may know, the tensions between Turks and Greeks go back much further than the 20th century, at least to the mid-15th century and the fall of Constantinople, and really even centuries before that with the Battle of Baphius in 1302 or 1299, depending on whom you ask. With a centuries-long, at least it is perceived that way, conflict as backdrop, many Turks feel that Enosis will expose them to retribution from Greek majority rule as rumors of ethnic vengeance spread. So, in response to various EOKA attacks, Ankara sanctions a secret army for its Cypriot kin, the Turkish Resistance Organization called TMT, which is founded in November 1957 and demands Taksim, meaning partition of Cyprus into 2 states, one Greek majority state and one Turkish majority state. By the end of 1957, the first isolated killings of Greek Cypriots signaled their will. Like Makarios, Ankara hopes the violence can be used as political leverage. If Cyprus cannot remain British, it must be divided between Greeks and Turks. Then, on March 4th, 1958, Grivas orders an end to the truce, and EOKA resumes strikes against British targets. And the situation takes another turn on June 7th the same year, when a bomb explodes outside the Turkish Information Office, part of the Turkish consulate. The sources aren't clear on whether this attack is conducted by the EOKA or as a false flag operation by the TMT. But where there is absolutely no ambiguity is about what follows. As more attacks hit Greek Cypriots in the days and weeks following the bombing, Grivas once more vows terror must be met with terror. Within 2 months, 55 assassinations by Turks on Greeks and 59 assassinations by Greeks on Turks rock Cyprus. The bombing of June 7th serves as a trigger of widespread intercommunal violence between the EOKA and TMT. Now Cyprus truly has become a 3-way war, and Britain is now caught in the midst of an ethnic conflict. Each side accuses the colonial army of favoring the other. Greeks say Turkish guns are hidden by British troops, while Turks claim Greek riders march unchecked. British troops now face not just insurgency, but something more like a civil war. They impose island-wide curfews, shut down cafes and cinemas, and ban all public gatherings. Patrols sweep through mixed villages, seizing weapons hidden in churches and mosques alike. We find ourselves in the unenviable position of trying to hold the balance between 2 hostile communities, both convinced that we are in league with the other, one British soldier explains. By summer 1958, the war has reached exhaustion. EOKA strength wanes, many leaders are captured or killed. Grivas himself only narrowly escapes raids several times, moving constantly between hideouts. In London, the government now realizes that military victory is meaningless without a political solution. Prime Minister Harry Macmillan proposes a plan in June 1958, a form of self-government under British sovereignty shared between Greek and Turkish Cypriots. While Ankara and the TMT are not opposed, they see the plan as providing them with meaningful political participation. The EOKA and Bishop Makarios, from afar, reject it outright. They see it as a betrayal of enosis, of union with Greece. By December, a British official observes, with the Archbishop deported, there is no one on the island left to negotiate, but few locals now trust Britain or want peace. That is why, on February 11th, 1959, Ankara and Athens step up. The two governments organize talks in Zurich, hammering out a compromise regarding the Mediterranean island both of them have vested interest in. Britain participates as a mediator after its demand is met to keep the Akrotiri and Dhekelia military bases. 8 days after, a four-power summit in London follows, with representatives from the British Empire, Greece, Turkey, and two for Cyprus, Makarios for the Greek Cypriots and Dr. Fazil Küçük representing Turkish Cypriots. Eventually, a compromise is reached. Cyprus will not unite with Greece, angering EOKA veterans. Instead, it will become one independent republic and Britain retains its bases. It is, as one historian calls it, an awkward compromise. Both sides gain something, yet neither achieves victory. Archbishop Makarios returns from exile to become the first president of the Republic of Cyprus, while Dr. Fazil Küçük assumes the vice presidency with veto powers. When the emergency finally ends, after 3 years and 4 months, EOKA halts its campaign, leaving behind over 1,500 dead. Approximately 390 British servicemen and police officers, 102 to 112 EOKA fighters, and over 1,000 Cypriot civilians are killed by the EOKA, including at least 70 to 100 Turkish Cypriots and hundreds of Greek Cypriots labeled as traitors. TMT casualty figures seem impossible to come by, possibly because the British tolerated TMT as a counterweight to the EOKA, so no British military operations targeted them. In the end, the Cyprus emergency becomes a cautionary tale. Britain fights fiercely to retain an imperial foothold and, by force, develops sophisticated counterinsurgency methods in the attempt to stamp out the EOKA. Yet, it discovers the hard truth that force alone cannot suppress a people's nationalist aspirations. Despite their might, the British on Cyprus cannot win Cypriot hearts and minds, for fear and hatred ultimately outweigh any goodwill. The EOKA's strategy works, not all the way to enosis, but far enough to get the British off the island, at least more or less. However, Greek Cypriots largely come to believe, even after the compromise, that only enosis can truly solve their grievances, while Turkish Cypriots think the same of Taksim. In other words, the compromise results in further entrenchment of the ideas already prevalent during the conflict. The emergency does not end with one side's triumph, but with a peace imposed by exhaustion, birthing a fragile new nation, the seeds of conflict baked right into its fabric straight from conception. Seeds that will sprout in the years and decades to come, to birth renewed conflict, leading to the divided Cyprus we know today. But that's a story for another day. For today, our story has been told. I hope you enjoyed our excursion into the Eastern Mediterranean, and if you want to know more about the Greek Civil War, check out our War to War episodes about it right here on the TimeGhost channel. To support our cause, join the TimeGhost army on timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Excelsior!